The moment Priya walked into the Monday morning all-hands meeting and saw the man standing at the front of the room, the coffee in her hand nearly slipped through her fingers. It was him. The same man she had thrown a drink on at the Hargrove Foundation Gala 2 nights ago. She had been so certain she would never see him again. Priya set her cup down on the nearest desk before anyone could notice her hand shaking and slid into a chair in the back row, keeping her head low. Around her, colleagues whispered excitedly about the new executive leadership coming in to turn things around at Callaway and Reed. She hadn't paid much attention to the internal memos. She'd been too busy meeting a project deadline to care about corporate reshuffling. Now she was paying for it. At the front of the room, the man adjusted his jacket cuffs and smiled at the assembled staff with the kind of calm that suggested he was used to walking into rooms full of people who didn't know what to make of him. He was tall, with the kind of composed bearing that made him look like he had never once been caught off guard in his life. Which, Priya thought miserably, made what had happened Saturday evening even more mortifying. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashton Mercer. As of today, I'm your new Chief Operating Officer. Applause filled the conference room. Priya pressed her palms flat against her thighs and stared at the table. She needed a new job, immediately, preferably in another city. Another state would be better. Canada wasn't out of the question. 2 days earlier, she had been standing near the terrace bar at the Hargrove Foundation Gala in downtown Chicago, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from her roommate and heels that were a half size too small. Watching a situation unfold that made her blood pressure climb, Priya worked as a senior event coordinator at Callaway and Reed, a mid-sized consulting firm that handled corporate events and nonprofit fundraisers across the Midwest. The Hargrove Gala was one of the firm's biggest annual accounts, and she had spent 11 weeks building it from the ground up. The lighting, the seating charts, the floral arrangements, the donor acknowledgement wall, every detail down to the font on the place cards. It was her project. Her name on the contract. She should have been enjoying it. Instead, she had spent most of the evening managing a slow-burning crisis in the corner of the ballroom, where a man in a slim-cut charcoal suit had been making increasingly pointed comments to the foundation's young communications associate, Priya, for the better part of an hour. Priya had noticed it the way she noticed everything at her events, quietly, from a distance, cataloging. The way Bee's smile had gone from genuine to fixed. The way she kept angling her body toward the exit, and the man kept shifting to block her path. The way his hand had landed on her arm twice, and Priya had pulled away twice, and he had moved closer both times. Priya had excused herself from a conversation with a donor and walked over. "There you are," she said brightly, stepping directly between them and looping her arm through Priya's. "I've been looking everywhere. The foundation director needs you for the remarks." She glanced at the man with a polished smile. "I'm so sorry to pull her away." Priya's relief was immediate and physical. The man's expression was not as warm. He said something under his breath that Priya didn't quite catch, but his tone was clear enough. He reached past her to touch Priya's elbow again, and that was when Priya's composure slipped. Her champagne glass was in her hand. The angle was wrong, or her grip tightened too fast, or maybe some part of her simply made a decision before the rest of her caught up. Either way, the contents of the glass arced sideways and hit the man square in the chest. The noise around them dropped by half. A few nearby guests turned to look. "I am so sorry," Priya said immediately, though her voice came out considerably less sorry-sounding than she intended. She pulled Priya backward 2 steps. "Let me get someone to help with that." She didn't stay to find out whether anyone did. She walked Priya to the other end of the ballroom, handed her off to a colleague, and spent the next 4 hours finishing the event with the focused efficiency of someone who had completely compartmentalized a disaster and was not thinking about it at all. She thought about it the entire drive home. She thought about it Sunday morning over coffee, and Sunday afternoon while she reorganized her closet, and Sunday night when she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the look on the man's face. Not angry exactly, but aware. Like he had filed her away somewhere and would retrieve the information when it suited him. She had told herself it didn't matter. Chicago was a big city. She was never going to see him again. And then Monday morning arrived, and Ashton Mercer walked into the all-hands meeting, and the universe, apparently, had a very specific sense of humor. Priya made it through the meeting without making eye contact. She made it back to her desk. She made it through 2 conference calls and a working lunch before her phone buzzed with a message from the office manager. "Mr. Mercer has requested a meeting with the event coordination team at 3 p.m. in the main boardroom. Please confirm attendance." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Confirmed." What else was she going to do? The boardroom meeting was professional and brief. Ashton Mercer sat at the head of the table and spoke about restructuring priorities, about aligning event strategy with the firm's new business development goals, about accountability and communication across departments. He was precise and articulate and gave no indication whatsoever that he recognized anyone in the room. Priya sat at the far end of the table and took very detailed notes and did not look directly at him once. As the meeting adjourned and people filtered out, she was the last to gather her things. She was reaching for her notebook when a calm voice behind her said, "Mrs. Khatri." She turned around slowly. Ashton Mercer was standing 2 feet away with his hands in his pockets. Up close, he was even more discomposing than he'd been from across the ballroom. There was something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Not amusement, not irritation, something between the two. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," he said, "since we didn't get a chance Saturday." Priya pulled her notebook against her chest. "Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. The champagne was an accident." "Was it?" She held his gaze. "Partially." Something shifted in his expression. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. "The event was excellent, by the way. The Hargrove Foundation director sent an email this morning saying it was the best gala they've had in 6 years. He paused. "That's your work?" "My team's work. Your name is on the contract." She didn't say anything. "I'll be reviewing the event portfolio this week," he said. "I'd like a briefing from you on Thursday." He picked up his folder from the table. "Good afternoon, Miss Khatri." He left before she could respond. Priya stood in the empty boardroom for a moment, then walked back to her desk, sat down, and quietly put her head in her hands. Her desk neighbor, a project manager named Dex, rolled his chair over with the expression of someone who had been waiting to ask questions for approximately 3 hours. "So," he said, "do you know the new COO or something? Because the way he looked at you in that meeting, he didn't look at me, Priya. He looked at you. I need to finish a budget review. Please go away." Dex went away, though not without a deeply suggestive eyebrow raise that she chose to ignore. That evening, Priya called her mother the way she did every Monday, sitting cross-legged on her apartment couch, with her shoes finally off and a mug of tea going cold beside her. "How was your event?" her mom asked. "The big gala one. It went well. The client was happy." "Good. Did you meet anyone interesting?" "Mom, I'm asking about networking. You always assume I'm asking about men. You're always asking about men." Her mother sighed with the practiced patience of someone who had been having a version of this conversation for 8 years. "Priya, you are 31 years old. Your cousin Ananya just announced her second pregnancy. Your father and I are not getting any younger. You're 62 and in excellent health. That is not the point. What is the point?" "The point," her mother said, with great dignity, "is that you work too much and feel too little, and one day you are going to realize you have built a very impressive career and forgotten to build a life around it." Priya looked at the stack of project folders on her coffee table. "I have a life, you have a planner." After she hung up, she sat with her tea for a long time. Her mother wasn't entirely wrong, and that was the most irritating part. Priya had dated in the past. She'd had a serious relationship in her late 20s with a man who was kind and funny and genuinely good. And she had ended it because she couldn't stop feeling like she was performing a version of herself she didn't quite believe in. She didn't know how to explain that to her mother. She barely knew how to explain it to herself. What she knew how to do was work. She was very good at that. She pulled the budget review back onto her lap and kept going. The Thursday briefing with Ashton Mercer lasted 90 minutes, which was 40 minutes longer than she had scheduled. He asked precise, uncomfortable questions. He wanted to know why certain vendor contracts had ballooned over budget in Q3, why 2 major clients had reduced their retainers, what the team's actual capacity was versus what they were telling the sales department. Priya answered all of it. She didn't hedge and she didn't make excuses, and when she thought a question was based on a faulty premise, she said so. He pushed back twice. She pushed back once. By the end, the folder between them was covered in both their handwriting, and she had the distinct impression that she had just had the most professionally demanding conversation of the last 2 years. As she was packing up, he said, "You told me the champagne was partially an accident." She looked up. What was the other part? She considered lying, or deflecting, or simply pretending she hadn't heard him. Then she said, "The man you were speaking to had been making a colleague of mine uncomfortable for most of the evening. I stepped in. The champagne was collateral." Ashton was quiet for a moment. "The woman in the green dress." "Yes, I noticed that too," he said. "I was about to say something when you got there first." He paused. "You have fast instincts." She didn't know what to do with that. She said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Mercer," and left. She made it to the elevator before she realized she was smiling, which she immediately stopped doing. Over the following weeks, their interaction settled into a kind of productive tension that Priya told herself was purely professional. He was thorough and demanding, and occasionally frustrating in the way that people who are almost always right tend to be frustrating. She responded by being even more prepared than usual, which her team noticed and attributed to the new leadership pressure, which wasn't wrong, but also wasn't the whole story. Once, staying late to finalize the proposal for a pharmaceutical company's annual conference, she found him still in the office when nearly everyone else had gone. He was in the small kitchen on their floor, making coffee with the focused attention of someone who took coffee seriously. He made her a cup without asking. She accepted it without thanking him, which was rude, and then said, "Thank you," 30 seconds later when she had recovered, which made him look like he was suppressing something. They sat on opposite sides of the small table and reviewed the proposal together until nearly 9 o'clock, and somewhere, in the middle of arguing about contingency budget line items, she looked up and caught him watching her with an expression she didn't have a category for and looked back down at her papers very quickly. She mentioned none of this to her roommate Jana, who was extremely perceptive and would draw conclusions immediately. She mentioned none of it to Dex, who was already insufferable on the subject. She did not mention it to her mother, who would consider it confirmation of something. She told herself it was nothing. He was her COO. She was a senior coordinator. Whatever warmth was developing in the space between professional and personal, she was not going to step into it. And then January brought the Meridian Hotels account, the biggest event contract the firm had seen in 3 years, and everything else became temporarily irrelevant because Priya had 6 weeks to plan a national conference for 800 attendees across 3 days in downtown Chicago, and there was no room in her brain for anything except logistics. She barely slept. She worked weekends. She ran her team with the kind of focused intensity that made newer staff slightly afraid of her and made her more experienced colleagues trust her completely. Ashton checked in twice a week and stayed out of her way the rest of the time, which she respected. When she needed a vendor contract expedited, it was expedited. When she identified a venue conflict that threatened the entire second day, he cleared his afternoon and sat with her team to work through options until they found one. The conference went perfectly. 800 attendees, 3 days. Not a single significant failure. The Meridian CEO gave a public compliment in the closing remarks that her boss sent to the entire firm as a company-wide email. That evening, the team went out to celebrate at a bar a few blocks from the office. Priya let herself have 2 drinks and actually laughed at things people said, which her colleagues noted with visible relief, because they had been mildly worried about her for 6 weeks. Ashton came for an hour and bought a round for the whole table and sat next to her in the only remaining seat, which happened to be next to her. He stayed long enough that it stopped being a coincidence and became a choice, and they talked, not about work, for once, about the city, about where she was from. Houston originally, then grad school in Boston, then Chicago for the last 4 years. About a documentary he'd watched recently that she hadn't seen, but was now genuinely curious about. When he stood to leave, he put on his coat and looked at her for a moment and said, "Good work, Priya." And the way he said it was different from how he said it in meetings, and she felt it somewhere behind her sternum in a way that she absolutely did not acknowledge. She walked home alone, which was fine. It was fine. Jana was awake when she got in, curled on the couch with a book, and looked up at her face and said, "Who is he? Nobody, go to sleep. Priya, good night, Jana." She went to bed. She stared at the ceiling. She made a firm, rational decision that she was not going to complicate her career over a feeling, and she was still thinking about the way he had said her name when she finally fell asleep sometime after midnight. The complication she had been carefully avoiding arrived from a direction she hadn't anticipated. Her cousin Sasha had been working at Callaway and Reed's HR department for about 8 months, a fact that Priya had noted and kept carefully separate from her professional life. Sasha was warm and funny, and also constitutionally incapable of keeping anything to herself for more than 48 hours. She had noticed Ashton in the office the way everyone had noticed Ashton in the office, and she had also, at some point, noticed the way Ashton moved through the office when Priya was in the room. Priya didn't know any of this until the evening Sasha appeared at her apartment door with wine and an expression that signaled she had been sitting on something for too long. "I need to tell you something," Sasha said. "Is it about work?" "Sort of." Priya let her in. They sat on the couch. Sasha opened the wine without being asked, which was a bad sign. "I've been spending time with Ashton," Sasha said. Priya went very still. What do you mean? Nothing has happened, I want to be clear. But we've had lunch twice and he's texted a few times and I think, Sasha pressed her lips together. I think I like him. The thing that happened in Priya's chest in that moment was something she would later identify, with great reluctance, as loss. Which meant it had been something to begin with. She looked at her cousin's face, open and uncertain and quietly hopeful, and she made a decision. Then you should pursue it, she said. He's a good person. Sasha searched her face. You don't have feelings for him? He's my co. That's not what I asked. Sasha, okay. Sasha nodded slowly. Okay. I just wanted to tell you first. After Sasha left, Priya washed both glasses, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark kitchen for a while. Then she did what she had always done with things that hurt in ways she couldn't fix. She went back to work. She was professional. She was composed. She delivered reports on time and ran her team well and didn't allow herself to think about whatever it was she had decided not to feel. When she saw Ashton in the hallway, she smiled and moved on. When he called with project questions, she answered them efficiently. If something had changed in her manner toward him, she thought she was hiding it reasonably well. She was not hiding it reasonably well. You've been weird for 2 weeks, Dex told her one afternoon bluntly, because Dex had no setting between silent and completely honest. I'm fine. You sent me a budget correction email at 11:45 on a Saturday. I noticed an error. Priya, what's going on? Nothing. I'm focused. It's a busy quarter. He looked at her for a long moment, then let it go. But she could feel him watching her after that, the way people watch something they're worried about. 3 weeks later, Ashton knocked on her open office door at the end of the day and asked if she had a few minutes. She did. He sat across from her and was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for him. He was normally direct. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to answer honestly. She waited. Have I done something to change things between us? She kept her expression neutral. Things are professional and appropriate, Mr. Mercer. I'm not sure what you mean. He watched her. You know what I mean. The honesty she had promised caught in her throat. She looked at the desk. My cousin told me she has feelings for you. The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. Sasha, he said. Yes, Priya. He leaned forward slightly. I've had lunch with Sasha twice because she approached me, and I didn't want to be unkind. I don't have feelings for her. She said nothing. The person I've been trying to find reasons to spend time with is you, he said. You know that. She looked at him. This is complicated. I know. You're the COO. I'm a senior coordinator on the events team. I know that too, and my cousin has been told kindly that I don't feel the same way. I did that last week. He paused. Before this conversation, Priya pressed her fingers against her temple. Ashton. It was the first time she had used his first name and they both noticed it. I don't do this, she said. I'm not good at this. I end things before they begin because I'm better at managing outcomes than I am at not knowing how something ends. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, then manage this one. Give it a start and a middle and figure out the end as it comes. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, I spilled champagne on you. You did, you're my boss. Technically, I'm the COO. Your direct supervisor is Ashton. Give me a start, he said. That's all I'm asking. The evening was cold and clear when they left the office together, walking to a restaurant 4 blocks away that she had never been to, and he had been wanting to try. They sat across from each other and talked until the restaurant started closing chairs around them, and by the time they were back on the sidewalk, her breath making small clouds in the January air, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, present. Not performing, not managing, not calculating, just there. He walked her to the corner where she caught her usual train and stopped. Can I call you this weekend, he asked. Yes, she said before she could second guess it. She rode home smiling at the floor of the train car. She didn't try to stop it. She told Jana that night, who made a sound that could only be described as victorious, and immediately asked 17 questions. She did not tell her mother. She was not ready for her mother. She told Sasha. That was harder. Sasha went quiet on the phone for long enough that Priya's stomach dropped, and then Sasha said, I had a feeling there was something there before I even said anything to you. I think I was hoping I was wrong. A pause. Are you happy? I think I could be. Then be happy, Sasha said. It's not a competition, and I'm not going to pretend I'm not a little stung, but that's mine to manage, not yours. Another pause, smaller. He really likes you, Priya. Be careful with that. She was careful with it, in the ways that were healthy and deliberate and honest. She called when she said she would call. She showed up to things. She told him, haltingly, about the relationship she had ended years ago and why, and he listened without trying to fix it or minimize it, and said something that surprised her. I think you knew that wasn't the right person. That's not the same as being bad at this. She was not immediately convinced, but she held on to it. Spring came, and with it, a change she hadn't expected. A position opened above her grade, Director of Event Strategy, and her boss submitted her name for consideration. It went through the standard review process, which included Ashton as part of the leadership panel, which he disclosed immediately and recused himself from the final vote on, which she was grateful for and told him so. She got the promotion, on her own work. She made sure of that, in her own mind, before she let herself feel good about it. Her mother called to congratulate her, and then immediately said, "Now that you're a director, is there anyone special?" And Priya, sitting in her new office with a view of the river, looked at the photo on her desk. Her and Ashton at his sister's birthday dinner 3 months ago, laughing at something she couldn't remember anymore, and said, "Actually, yes." The silence from her mother lasted 4 full seconds. Then, "Priya Renee Khatri, you have been keeping a secret from me. His name is Ashton. He's thoughtful and precise and occasionally maddening." "How long?" "A few months. And you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now." Her mother made a sound that contained an entire encyclopedia of feelings and then said, "I want to meet him, I know. Soon, I know, Mom." She flew home to Houston in June, and Ashton came with her. He sat at her parents' kitchen table and talked with her dad about infrastructure projects and talked with her mom about cooking. And when they were helping clear the dishes after dinner, Priya stood in the doorway watching him laugh at something her mother said, and understood, simply and without drama, that this was what it was supposed to feel like, not a performance, not a calculation, not the shape of the life she was supposed to want, just this. That autumn, on a quiet Sunday in the apartment he had moved into 2 blocks from hers, practical, and also, she teased him, transparently strategic, he proposed in the kitchen while she was making coffee, with a ring he had picked out alone because he knew her taste and trusted himself on it, and no elaborate production, because he knew her well enough to know she would have found an elaborate production exhausting. She said yes before he finished asking. She called her mother. The sound her mother made could probably be heard in the next neighborhood. She called Sasha, who had started seeing someone she was genuinely happy about, and Sasha said finally, with the warmth of someone who had worked through something and come out the other side of it. She told Dex in person at his desk, and he pointed at her and said, "I knew it," with such emphatic satisfaction that 3 people looked up from their work. What Priya hadn't known, until the pieces fell together in the investigation, that followed a suspicious insurance claim tied to the car that had sideswiped Ashton's vehicle in March. A collision that had, at the time, seemed like bad luck in icy conditions, was that the luck hadn't been bad at all. It had been manufactured, the driver had been hired. The trail led back through 2 intermediaries and then, with the patience of detectives and the misfortune of a cell phone that hadn't been wiped properly, directly to a name she recognized. Sasha's ex-boyfriend, Felix, who had been quietly furious that Sasha had moved on and had focused that fury, irrationally and dangerously, on Ashton as the presumed cause. The logic was broken and the motive was thin, but the intent was real. Ashton had walked away from the accident with a bruised shoulder and a totaled car. He could have walked away with much worse. Felix was arrested. The case moved through the legal system with the steadiness of something that had plenty of evidence and no ambiguity. Sasha was horrified. Priya sat with her on the phone for 2 hours the night the arrest happened, and afterward they didn't talk about Felix again. The wedding was in April, in Chicago, in a venue that Priya had coordinated herself because she was constitutionally incapable of leaving something this important to someone else, and because, as she told Ashton, it was what she was actually good at. "You're good at more than that," he said. "I know," she said, "but this is what I love." She had said that specific word, referring to that specific work, and he had looked at her, and she had also meant the other thing, the larger thing, the thing she had spent years talking herself out of believing she was capable of sustaining. She was capable of it. She had just needed to stop managing outcomes long enough to let one begin. Under late April skies, with the city still deciding between winter and spring, Priya Khatri, who had once thrown champagne on the man who would become her husband, who had once believed she was better at leaving than staying, who had built her career on the precision of her plans and learned, slowly, to leave room for the things that couldn't be planned, stood at the front of a room full of people she loved, and chose the life she had been afraid to want. It turned out the start was the easy part. The middle was where everything worth having lived.